So we're going to look at skin improvement of the lower cheek. I always start with the line between the ala and the tragus, the alar-tragal line. Then from the zygomatic arch, which is running approximately here, I find my first entry point where I can palpate the arch of the zygoma easily. The entry point is more or less on the line between the lateral canthus and the tragus, just in front or just on the hairline. And so from here I can draw a vector line to the oral commissure. And this would be my first entry point, this would be my second entry point. Then the mandibular angle can be my third entry point. In between the second and the third entry point, I can find my fourth entry point. And from here I can use a long cannula. I usually use a 50 millimeter cannula in order to treat everything. Now, as you can see, there's already 2 entry points made here. I will not be using them. They were made for infraorbital treatment, but I will focus now on the lower cheek. So I will use just little blabs of lidocaine containing adrenaline. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 entry points. And with a 23 gauge needle, I will make the actual entry points. Disinfection, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alrighty. Now, what's important with treatment of this area is disinfection, because, as you know, the hairs contain a lot of bacteria, and if you don't pay attention, then the cannula is going to be touching the hair. So you can use either very vigorous disinfection, or you could use a drenched gauze to cover the hair, and then it's relatively safe. Of course, you still have to pay attention. So I introduce the cannula into that opening that I've made. Sometimes there's a bit of resistance, so it's good to help your cannula a little bit by rotation. So I place one finger in front and one finger behind my cannula entry point, and then it's easy to stretch the skin. And I push my syringe down in order to lift the tip of the cannula. And as you can see, I can nicely advance the cannula then at the dermal-subdermal junctions, exactly where I want to get that skin improvement. And I place small retrograde linear threads. It's better to place many small ones than a few big ones. We've also hyperdiluted the product in order to distribute it better. So the chances of visible, let's say, deposits, sausage-like deposits, the risk of that will be much lower. As you can see, there's a very thin skin, so it's definitely needing some stimulation, some neocollagenesis. But it's also giving us a little bit of a risk, because it is also possible to penetrate the skin with a 25 gauge cannula. There's a lot of, let's say, fragile little veins, especially in this area where there is the mesenteric cutaneous ligaments, the false retaining ligaments that we find here in this area. So that's my first entry point. You see not much to see, but you see in a beginning of a little bit of swelling. So if there's visible threads, visible deposits, you can even it out by direct massage, giving a little bit of pressure. Can I have some disinfection, please? The lowered viscosity of the product is quite easy to even it out. Thank you. Okay, so here's my second entry point. Again, I want to be superficial, one finger in front, one finger behind my cannula. And again, small retrograde linear threads. Let's say approximately 0.05 milliliters per thread per retrograde. And the best results will be visible at about 3 months after the treatment. Of course, we're dependent on how well her tissue will react. And the further someone is into menopause, let's say the least efficient you would expect the neocollagenesis effect. But of course the necessity for neocollagenesis is increasing. So she needs calcium hydroxylapatite superficially, but after 3 months we have to evaluate how well it has stimulated those fibroblasts. Okay, third entry point. Wait, before I forget, I see here a little bit of, want to also even the contour, so I'll give her a little bit more in this area, just for a little bit more volume, for a more even contour of the skin. So the third entry point is the mandibular angle entry point. So from here, I advance my cannula into the preauricular area. Now, as you can see, this has already been treated. The preauricular wrinkles have been treated over here. So the first lines, I don't have to inject much. But then in between and after, I do have to inject about 0.05 milliliters per retrograde. And so I make sure that everywhere in this whole lower face is just a little bit of calcium hydroxylapatite stimulating that skin. Could I have a bit more, please? All right, so I'm continuing. From over here. So, small retrograde linear threads just at the dermal-subdermal junction. And of course the earlobes have been disinfected. And then I advance my cannula up to the post-gel sulcus, and then just below the mandibular line, I also give some extra volume in order to get more of a light reflection here, the lower part of the lower cheek. I'm going to continue from the fourth and last entry point of the lower cheek. Stretch the skin. As you can see, there might be a small bruise here, so again, it's important to be gentle because there's superficial, fragile veins here that might, as you can see, cause a bruise, some ecchymosis. So cannula is never a guarantee that you are safe, never a guarantee that there is no bruising, but it is safer than a needle. There's a lower risk of bruising. So whenever you can, I believe it is good to use a cannula, unless you're very uncomfortable with cannulas. then it's probably better to use a needle. So I will put some direct pressure here in order to reduce the bruising. I have to